And I call on the Minister, Michael Russell, to wind up the debate.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm very conscious of a number of themes that have emerged this afternoon. I want to treat them carefully, but I want to start with as I often do, with a quotation, and it is from John Mahaffey, the UK ambassador to Ireland in the Second World War. And he said, I think rather wryly at one stage, looking at Ireland and the difficulties it had and the language that was used, phrases make history here. It actually also happens to be the title of a very good book of Irish political quotations. And what John Mahaffey meant was he had to be careful in difficult circumstances. You had to make sure that you did not make those circumstances worse, and that you tried to use accurate and careful language to describe where you were in order that you might make some progress. And I say that because I am concerned at the language that has come particularly from the Tory front bench today, and also from some of the backbenches. And I want to just make clear the difficulties that are being caused by that, and the inaccuracy that's within it. Ruth Davidson said over the weekend in an interview on television, I was on the subsequent interview, I, however, was in a snowstorm. Ruth Davidson, I think, was indoors during the interview. She said that the SNP government had rammed through emergency legislation. This chamber voted 86 to 27 in a democratic vote. You cannot use those words accurately. Secondly, Rachel Hamilton said that rushed legislation was always bad legislation and pointed to the example of the Land Reform Bill. Well, I was on the committee of the Land Reform Bill. There were 2 years of consultation, and then 9 months between introduction and royal assent. Now, I understand that Rachel Hamilton does not like the Land Reform Bill. She does not like land reform, like many of those sitting round her. They feel threatened by land reform. I wonder why. But the reality is that was not a rushed piece of legislation. And then we've actually seen other examples here. Adam Tompkins' account of this morning's meeting of the committee and the evidence of the Law Society, I think, at the very least, could be challenged. And it would be challenged simply by looking at the video of that evidence being given, because there was a very constructive discussion on a whole range of issues. But also, there was other evidence given. It wasn't simply the Law Society turning up and saying, woe is me. There were many discussions. Let's take, for example, Section 5 on general principles and the Charter. The bill has made clear steps to improve the position in the UK bill, keeping the Charter in Scots law. And indeed, in other evidence, in exactly that same session, Professor Aileen McHarg very clearly pointed out that effective remedies to the problems that were raised by Professor Tompkins are within the bill. So presenting these issues in the accurate way is extremely important. And I suppose the nadir we got to, although I do regret Donald Cameron's use of language, the word disgrace, the description of the Liberal Democrats as pious, that doesn't help us trying to discuss this carefully. And the nadir was, of course, Mr. Golden, who used the word illegal, who used the words wildcat legislation. Strangely enough, words that occurred in a press release from Mr. Cameron earlier today. Clearly, there has been some collusion on the choice of words. This is not illegal. The legislation creates exactly the circumstances and anticipates the circumstances we are in. There are remedies for those circumstances. So I think it is really important to make that point clear. Phrases do make history. And if we're going to debate and discuss in what are difficult times, resolution that we have to find, let's try and do so with a level of accuracy rather than what we have heard this afternoon. And if we're going to do it, let's also not mistell our history. Of course, we all took different positions at various times on the Constitutional Convention, and all of us did different things. Mr. Arthur said he was, and Mr. Golden were too young to vote in the 1997 referendum. I ran the SNP campaign, but I also ran it jointly with Andy Miles from the Liberal Democrats and Jack McConnell from Labour. So there was, of course, a working together in the Yes, Yes campaign. But let's move on to the key question, which is not what we necessarily did in those referenda. Let's talk about the key question of what we would do now. And that's the point that Bruce Crawford raised, very importantly. What would we do now? Do we put the interests of devolution, the devolved settlement, in the forefront of our minds, or do we put something else at the forefront of our mind, whether it be shouting, in the case of Professor Tompkins, or party advantage? So let's look at that very carefully. Now let me turn to some of the issues of detail before I come to the point I want to conclude on. On the issues of detail, I am, and I've made that clear from the very beginning of this process, I will go on making it clear, open to discussion, debate, and of course the bill is open to amendment, as I've indicated to Mr Rumbles at the start of this, and make it clear here. And if there are defects in any of the clauses that members are passionate about, and clearly Mr Rumbles is passionate about clause 13, then amendments can be brought forward and discussed in the normal way. And indeed, and I again pay tribute to the Bureau and to all those who are involved, we have a system developed which will allow that to happen, and I hope happen well. But I am also happy to argue for section 13. I have to say that the wording is directly drawn from the existing provisions in EU law in the European Communities Act 1972. I know I really have to make progress on this, I'm sorry. And therefore, we believe that that power continues to be appropriate in certain circumstances. But if we have to define those circumstances more closely, if there have to be constraints upon those circumstances that the Chamber wishes to see, that's an entirely legitimate aspiration to bring forward those amendments, and let us debate and discuss them, and I hope we will. And there are a range of other issues raised today which can be addressed either in evidence at stage 2 or in the willingness I've shown to discuss this with any individual member or any grouping, or even to be addressed at stage 3. So we have a whole range of ways of dealing with the detail of the bill, and we should do so using accurate language and with a determination that no matter the views of people whether or not we should be here, that we try and get the best legislation possible. But the heart of this issue, Presiding Officer, is this, and it came in 2 succeeding speeches this afternoon. It came from Mr Carlaw and Alec Neil. And I commend both of them, though I disagree with Mr Carlaw and I agree with Alec Neil. But I do commend both those speeches. Now, I fear that Jackson Carlaw might even unwittingly have taken us back in this debate rather than us forward, whereas Alec Neil has tried to take us forward. He will recognise this is a case of respice prospice, something that he himself talks about often, the motto of his old school. And Kate Forbes and Neil Findlay made exactly the same point. Now, tomorrow we will have to address the substantive issue of whether we can get an agreement. And if the UK government have dug themselves into a position where they cannot accept the basic principle, and Kate Forbes made it, not to sign away our responsibilities. Mark Drakeford made it, and she quoted Mark Drakeford in this, not to sign away our responsibilities in this chamber. If the UK government is determined not to do that, then there cannot be an agreement. But if, as Alec Neil has indicated, there is the possibility of finding in the middle there some way in which we can accept the devolved settlement, which is the devolved settlement, can't be wished away. If the UK government wish to alter the devolved settlement, they must come with primary legislation to alter the devolved settlement. But if there is some way to do so, and Alec Neil has indicated some of those ways, then it can be found. Presiding Officer, a final point, if I might. I was concerned with Adam Tompkins' presentation of the issue of the Sewell Convention. It had eerie echoes of Jacob Rees-Mogg on the Irish border, blaming the issue on the Irish border on the EU, not on the Brexiteers. Now, let me make it absolutely clear. The Sewell Convention should apply and should go on applying. And nobody in this chamber, I hope, believes otherwise. And if there is any attempt to argue, as appeared to be the case, that in some sense we had sold the pass on the Sewell Convention, let me put that to one side now. Let me put that firmly and clearly. Don't blame the victim for the crime. The reality of this situation is the Sewell Convention applies and should confine, and it would be an extreme step, the type of step I hope does not be anticipated by Mr Carlaw in his speech. It would be an extreme step if what was to happen was that convention was to be abandoned by the UK government. Mr Tompkins simply keeps shouting. I've tried to indicate I think that's the inappropriate way to deal with these issues. The appropriate way to these issues is to have the type of debate that he was involved in this morning, where there was constructive debate in the committee. And I don't know what he had for his lunch, but clearly it didn't agree with him. Now, let me finish, Presiding Officer, by simply saying this. I will go into tomorrow's discussions in London, as I know Mark Drakeford will, and I spoke to him at lunchtime today, hopeful, positive and purposeful. But we will be judged in the end by the chambers to which we report. and the judgment will come on that key issue as Kate Forbes indicated to it. Have we made sure that we stand up for and do not trade away the responsibilities and rights of this Parliament? Or have we found some weakness within ourselves that does not allow us to do it? I believe we should stand up for the rights of this Parliament, because that's standing up for the rights of the people of Scotland. But I go in to negotiate absolutely determined to try and find a way to get an agreement.
Thank you. That concludes our Stage 1 debate. The next item of business is consideration of motion 10784 in the name of Derek Mackay on a financial resolution for the UK withdrawal from the European Union Legal Continuity Scotland Bill. And I would call on Derek Mackay to move the motion.
Formally moved.
Thank you very much. The next item of business is consideration of a business motion 10838 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick on behalf of the Bureau setting out a business programme. Could I call on Joe Fitzpatrick to move motion 10838?
Formally moved.
Can I ask if any member wishes to speak against this motion? No. In that case, the question is that motion 10838 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. Thank you very much. We come now to decision time. The first question is that motion 10817 in the name of Michael Russell on the UK withdrawal from the European Union Legal Continuity Scotland Bill at Stage 1 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We're not agreed. We'll move to a division and members may cast their votes now. The result of the vote on motion 10817 in the name of Michael Russell is yes 94, no 30. There were no abstentions. The motion is therefore agreed. I would just point out that because this is an emergency bill procedure and the Parliament has agreed to the general principles of the bill, Stage 2 amendments should be lodged by 2 p.m. this Friday. That's Friday the 9th of March at 2 p.m. The next question is that motion 10784 in the name of Derek Mackay on a financial resolution for the continuity bill be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We're not agreed. We'll move to a division again and members may cast their votes now.
Change our mind now.
The result of the vote on motion 10784 in the name of Derek Mackay is yes 94, no 30. There were no abstentions. The motion is therefore agreed. And that concludes decision time. We'll move now to members' business in the name of Stuart Stevenson on electronic and internet voting. We'll just take a few moments for members and ministers to change seats.